Reaching a solid B2 level of English is the first great milestone in your English learning journey. After all, this is the level that precedes the advanced levels, C1 and C2. But what does having this level mean for your English? What kinds of things should you be able to do as a B2 level learner? And finally, how to know you are at this level. In today's episode, I'm going to give you a breakdown of the B2 level, and also I'm going to give you some tips that will help you reach this first milestone. So let's get started. Hey there, how's it going? Thiago here, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. In case you're listening to me for the very first time, this is a podcast designed to help intermediate and advanced learners of English communicate with more confidence, more accuracy, more clarity, and more awareness. If this sounds like something you want for yourself and your English, subscribe to the channel if you are on YouTube, or follow the show if you are listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. That way, you won't miss a single new episode. So, the B2 level. I see many learners leaving comments here under my videos saying things like, oh, my goal this year is to reach a B2 level. Other learners are even more ambitious and they say, oh, I want to get to a C1 level soon. But knowing what these levels mean is the very first step if you have any hope to get to them. Because if you don't know where you're going and how to get there, how can you get there? So this is actually the first video of a series of videos I'll be making here for the podcast detailing the levels of the CEFR. So I'm going to start with B2 level. This is the first episode. And then down the road, I also plan to do a more detailed analysis of the C1 level and the C2 level. I believe that by giving you more clarity about these levels, that will help you, reach those levels quicker. So I want to start by giving you a general breakdown of the B2 level in just a few words. After that, I'm going to get into the macro skills, speaking, listening, reading, and writing. And more towards the end of the episode, I also want to cover very quickly the micro skills. So macro versus micro skills. So a general overview of the B2 first. A B2 first qualification, listen, proves you have the language skills to live and work independently in an English-speaking country or study on courses taught in English. We're going to get into what kind of courses pretty soon, but this description actually comes from the Cambridge website. The B2 first qualification is Cambridge's exam to test candidates at this level. If you pass the B2 first exam, it means that you are at a B2 level. All right? This exam, the B2 first, is accepted for entry to foundation, pathway, and pre-sessional courses in English-speaking countries. A little parenthesis here. These courses, foundation courses, pathway courses, pre-sessional courses, they are prep courses for university. Imagine you are an international student and you want to go to university abroad, maybe in the United States or in Canada, but you might need some training before starting the actual undergraduate program over there. Maybe there is a gap between, the high school that is taught in your country and the high school that is taught in the country you're going to. So there is this gap, either academically speaking, or also when it comes to English speaking. They usually take about a year, and it's good for you to improve your level of English for the actual academic course you're going to start, or to improve your academic chops to be able to follow the real program 1 year later. All right? So for these kinds of courses, the B2 first level or qualification is already enough for you to participate. Notice that it's for these pathway courses, not necessarily for the actual undergraduate academic program. Moving on here, the B2 first qualification is also accepted for entry to undergraduate programs taught in the medium of English in non-English speaking countries. I actually have an example about this because I have a private student from Italy who has recently started a master's program in Italy to study finance. His level now must be at around B2 to a low C1 level. I've been teaching him for a little over a year, and he was accepted into the program. The course is taught fully in English, but it's not taught in an English-speaking country. It's taught in Italy, in this case. So for academic programs like that, that are not taught in an English-speaking country, but that are taught fully in English, in many institutions, a B2 level certificate is already enough for them to accept your candidacy, usually in undergraduate programs. In my student's case, he got into a master's program, but I think it depends on the institution. Some institutions might not accept a B2 first qualification for a master's program. Others might. But generally speaking, for undergraduate programs, it is accepted, all right? And finally here, when it comes to the linguistic ability, generally speaking, a B2 level learner can express themselves clearly without much sign of having to restrict what they want to say. So you speak clearly, you communicate your ideas clearly, and you don't spend a lot of time searching for words. That's the solid B2 level. Also, a B2 level learner has a sufficient range of language to be able to give clear descriptions, express viewpoints, and develop arguments without much conspicuous searching for words, signs, and even using some complex sentence forms to do so. So a B2 level learner tends to communicate in a more straightforward way without a lot of complex ideas or vocabulary or structures, but sometimes is able to attempt and succeed at using more complex vocabulary, more complex structures. Sometimes, all right? And also this word conspicuous. In this case, conspicuous means obvious. So you are able to express yourself without obvious search for words, for expressions. Well, we just saw that being a B2 level learner means that you're able to express yourself clearly, right? And part of being able to express yourself clearly has to do with having clear pronunciation. If you're looking to improve your pronunciation and listening skills significantly, you should definitely check out my pronunciation course, The Sounds of English. This is a recorded course that I've put together, in which I compile the most common sounds of the English language. We go into each sound individually in detail with lots of examples, and also the most connected speech patterns that you hear native speakers using in media in real life. Having this knowledge will help you better understand fast English when you hear it, and also will help you speak more clearly and consequently more fluently. If you are interested to learn more about the course, the link is here in the description of the video, also in the pinned comment below, or in the show notes if you are on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Do check it out. Okay, so now that I've given you a general overview of the B2 level, let's get into the nooks and crannies of the level. So first, I want to talk about the macro skills. What are the 4 macro skills? Speaking, listening, reading, and writing. The macro skills, the main skills. And then after that, I'm also going to cover some of the micro skills and what being a B2 level learner means for your speaking, for your listening, for your reading, for your writing, and so on. So I want to start with the most sought after skill among English learners, speaking. You want to speak more confidently, right? You want to speak more fluently, more clearly. You want people to understand what you're saying. So what does it mean for your speaking skills in English being at a B2 level? Listen, a B2 level speaker or user can communicate spontaneously, often showing remarkable fluency and ease of expression in even longer complex stretches of language. Are you paying attention to some key words here? Communicate spontaneously. Are you able to communicate spontaneously? That's a feature of a B2, a solid B2 level learner. Showing remarkable fluency and ease of expression, even when you have to speak for longer periods of time. For example, are you able to give a monologue about a topic for 1, 2, 3, 5 minutes? How would you feel if I gave you a topic right now and asked you to talk about that topic for 2 minutes straight, non-stop? Would you be able to do it? That's a trait of a solid B2 level learner. Let's move on. Can produce stretches of language with a fairly even tempo, although they can be hesitant as they search for patterns and expressions. There are few noticeably long pauses. Okay, so it's okay to hesitate a little bit if you are a B2 level learner, but you see, there are few noticeably long pauses. If you are the type of speaker who pauses too much or for too long, your speaking skills might not be at a solid B2 level yet. You might be more of a B1, B1 plus level learner than a solid B2. So think about that. Finally, if you are a B2, you can interact with a degree of fluency and spontaneity that makes regular interaction with users of the target language, English in this case, quite possible without imposing strain on either party. Either party is like either person involved in the conversation. But this is a key word here, or key phrase, without imposing strain. If I'm talking to you and if I strain to understand you, it means that your speech is not clear enough, it's not coherent enough, it's confusing, you're mispronouncing lots of words, so I have to strain to understand your message. I have to make an extra amount of effort to try to get your message. So, this is not a trait of a B2 level speaker. You see, you should communicate in a way that doesn't impose strain on your listener. In other words, people should be able to understand you easily at this level already. Now let's move on to the listening skill, which is the second macro skill. What does it mean for your listening to be at a B2 level? Check it out. Can understand standard language or a familiar variety, live or broadcast, on both familiar and unfamiliar topics normally encountered in personal, social, academic, or vocational life. Only extreme background noise, inadequate discourse structure, or idiomatic usage influence the ability to understand. You see, so when it comes to understanding standard media and media that is spoken in standard language, at a B2 level, you should already be able to understand most of it. The only exception, as we just saw, is if you are in a very noisy place and the background noise is influencing your listening ability, or if you are listening to something weird in terms of discourse, like maybe somebody is speaking with lots of slang or lots of idioms, like unusual expressions to you, then yes, you might not be able to understand that. So as far as media spoken in standard language goes, at a B2 level, you should be able to understand most, if not all of them. Can understand the main ideas of complex discourse on both concrete and abstract topics delivered in standard language or a familiar variety, including technical discussions in their field of specialization. All right? So even complex speech, you are able to understand as long as the complex speech is spoken in standard language. I mean, the type of English I usually use here on the podcast is quite straightforward and quite standard. Yes, I use some unknown words from time to time. I use some idioms from time to time, some expressions, but most of the time it's pretty straightforward the way I communicate and pretty standard. So if you have that feeling that you can understand almost everything I say, that's probably why. Because, I am kind of speaking more for the B1, B2 level learner here, obviously. Yeah, so my message needs to be clear. You're also able to understand complex language in your area of expertise. So let's say you work in technology. Maybe you are a developer or a software engineer. If you are at a B2 level of English already, chances are you can read the manuals, the instructions, the materials related to your area and understand them fairly easily. That's what it means here. That's what it says. All right? Technical discussions in your field of specialization. All right? You can also follow extended discourse and complex lines of argument, provided the topic is reasonably familiar and the direction of the argument is signposted by explicit markers. Explicit markers like, okay, now let's talk about this. First of all, blah, blah, blah. Second of all, blah, blah, blah. Finally, blah, blah, blah. You see, these are all explicit markers. I am explicitly showing you where I am in my speech and where I'm going. So speech like that for a B2 level learner is quite easy to understand because it's clearly signposted. All right. And notice that, yes, you are able to follow or to understand complex conversations as long as they are about familiar topics to you. So if you are listening to a podcast about something that is completely unfamiliar to you, you will struggle a ton to understand that. So keep that in mind. Still talking about listening at B2 level. If you are at a B2 level, you can extract the main points from the arguments and discussions in news and current affairs programs. In other words, you are able to understand most of what you hear in the news. So can you understand the news in English when you watch them or when you listen to them? That's an indication that your English skills are probably at a B2 level already. Finally, you can also understand documentaries, live interviews, talk shows, plays, and the majority of films in the standard form of the language or a familiar variety. Again, those key phrases, the language spoken in those pieces of media must be either the standard form of the language without a lot of crazy expressions, or at least if there is going to be a lot of idiomatic expressions, at least they should be on a familiar topic to you for you to actually be able to understand it. Got it? Moving on. Now let's talk about reading a little bit. So as a reader, how can you tell you are at a B2 level of English? A B2 level learner can read with a large degree of independence, adapting style and speed of reading to different texts and purposes, and using appropriate reference sources selectively. Has a broad active reading vocabulary, but may experience some difficulty with low-frequency idioms. That's a key phrase right here. Did you listen to that? Has a broad active reading vocabulary. Something broad is something large, wide, extensive. So at a B2 level, you should have a broad or extensive active reading vocabulary. Reading vocabulary, meaning that you should know a lot of words already when you read them in text. You might not use those words actively in speaking. That's okay. But you know them when you see them in a book or in a magazine, for example. You recognize them. You know what they mean. That's what we are talking about here, okay? Having a broad active reading vocabulary. Active reading vocabulary is not the same as active speaking vocabulary. You might know a lot of words when it comes to your reading skills in English, and you understand them when you read them, but you might not use any of them when you actually speak. That's another problem, let's say. It's another area. Moving on, a B2 level learner can scan quickly through several sources, articles, reports, websites, books, in parallel, in both their own field and in related fields, and can identify the relevance and usefulness of particular sections for the task at hand. So you are very comfortable with all these kinds of text, articles, reports, websites, books, and you can scan quickly. When you scan a text, you quickly read it because you are looking for specific information. For example, imagine you want to go to the movies. What do we usually do nowadays? We either open our favorite movie app on our phones, or we go to our favorite movie website, and then we check the movies available and the times, and also the places they are showing. That kind of reading that we do is usually called scanning, because you're looking for specific information. Let's say, oh, I want to see movie X. What times is movie X showing? Let me check on the website here. Okay, this time, that time. Oh, this is a good one for me. I'm going to go with this one. You see, this is scanning, okay? We're not reading all the information on the page. You are just looking for that specific information you're looking for. And you are able to do that quickly if you are already at a B2 level of English. Can scan quickly through long and complex texts, locating relevant details. Can quickly identify the content and relevance of news items, articles, and reports on a wide range of professional topics, deciding whether a closer study is worthwhile. Finally, can read for pleasure with a large degree of independence, adapting style and speed of reading to different texts, magazines, more straightforward novels, history books, biographies, travel logs, guides, lyrics, poems, using appropriate reference sources selectively. Can read novels with a strong narrative plot that use straightforward, unelaborated language, provided they can take their time and use a dictionary. That's also a key piece of information when it comes to being a reader at B2 level. Do you read for pleasure? Do you have the habit of reading books, novels, fiction for pleasure? That's a trait of a solid B2 level learner. And another trait, as we saw here, is you are able to understand those books, those stories, those novels. All right? But keep in mind that we are talking about stories and novels that use more straightforward language. Some novels are more complex. For example, Game of Thrones. I read the first 3 books in the Song of Ice and Fire series, right? The Game of Thrones books. And they are quite hard. Yeah, because, they use very specific vocabulary, very archaic vocabulary sometimes. So even to me, I struggled with some words. But, as long as you can understand the whole plot, that's fine. But for example, Harry Potter. I read a little bit of the first Harry Potter book, and I found the language there quite straightforward. So reading a novel like Harry Potter, for example, would probably be easy for you as a B2 level learner. Reading Game of Thrones, maybe not so much. That's what they're saying here, okay? Yes, you can understand fiction, novels, as long as they are written in more straightforward language. And one last detail, provided that you can take your time and use a dictionary. So if you're not in a rush to read that piece of text and make sense of it, you do well with it. Maybe on a testing situation or when you have limited time, you might struggle. Keep that in mind. Finally, let's talk about the last macro skill, which is writing. Of course, writing is also involved in successful language learning. It's not just about speaking. So, as a B2 level learner, what kind of writing should you be able to produce? Listen. Can produce clear, detailed texts on a variety of subjects related to their field of interest, synthesizing and evaluating information and arguments from a number of sources. Can give clear, detailed descriptions of real or imaginary events and experiences, marking the relationship between ideas in clear, connected text, and following established conventions of the genre concerned. Key phrase here. You are able to follow established conventions of the genre concerned. What does that mean, Thiago? Well, it means this. Imagine you are writing an email in the workplace. All right? It's a professional email. There is a standard format that you need to know how to use, how to follow. So if it's a formal or professional email, we usually start with dear and the person's name. If you have more familiarity with the person, you could start with hello and the name of the person. That's fine. But the way you structure your email, breaking it down into clear paragraphs, the way you usually close, for example, looking forward to hearing from you, thanks for your attention, maybe with things like best regards or sincerely. You see, this is all part of the established convention of the genre. If you're going to write an email at work, there is a certain standard format that you should be able to follow. Now, if you are writing an article for a blog, there is a standard format that you should follow. If you are writing an essay, an argumentative essay, where you have to defend a position or an opinion, there is a standard format there. So, you see, a B2 level learner is able to produce all these kinds of tags in the appropriate style. And I haven't even talked about the formality of the writing, right? Because some texts need to be written in a more formal register, others in a more informal register, and others can be more neutral. So do you know how to write in a more formal way, in a more informal way, or neutral way? It's also involved here. Can give clear, detailed descriptions on a variety of subjects related to their field of interest. Can give a review of a film, book, or play. You see? Can produce an essay or report which develops an argument systematically with appropriate highlighting of significant points and relevant supporting detail. Can produce a detailed description of a complex process. can evaluate different ideas or solutions to a problem. So for example, if you take the Cambridge B2 first exam, in the writing paper, you usually have to write an essay. The way the B2 first writing task works is they give you a topic and they give you 2 points already for you to cover. You should share your opinion about the topic, covering those 2 points. But then they also ask you to add a 3rd point by yourself, on your own, defending your position about the topic. And finally, can produce an essay or report which develops an argument, giving reasons in support of or against a particular point of view, and explaining the advantages and disadvantages of various options. Can synthesize information and arguments from a number of sources. Just as an example here, imagine you have a topic like, some people believe that online education is better than face-to-face education. What do you think? In a response, talk about this point and that point and add a 3rd point of your choice to develop this topic further. Something like that, you know? So, are you able to produce an essay about this topic, for example? All right? So that's a brief breakdown of the macro skills. Now, I want to quickly touch on the micro skills. What are some of the most common micro skills when it comes to English learning? Well, grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation. What does being a B2 level learner mean when it comes to grammar? It means that you have good grammatical control. Occasional slips or non-systematic errors and minor flaws in sentence structure may still occur, but they are rare and can often be corrected in retrospect. I really like that because, it's about occasional slips. A slip is a mistake that you know about. You know the correct form, but for some reason, maybe you are distracted or speaking too quickly. You make that mistake. That's a slip. You see, these are occasional. They're not frequent. All right? And also, these are mistakes that can usually be corrected in retrospect. This is a key piece of information here, guys. In retrospect, self-correction is crucial for you to develop, all right? If you want to be a solid B2 level speaker of English, you need to develop more self-awareness in order to self-correct. Because, we all make mistakes, it's fine. But the idea is, if you say something wrong, you should be able to immediately catch that mistake, realize that, and go back and correct it. If you can do that frequently, it means that you are probably at a solid B2 level. So keep that in mind. You also show a relatively high degree of grammatical control, and you don't make mistakes which lead to misunderstanding. So at a B2 level, there is a frequency of mistakes still, both in writing and in speaking, but these are often mistakes that don't really interfere or impede communication. The person can still understand your message. Those are the kinds of mistakes a typical B2 learner, let's say, is allowed to make, all right? But mistakes that completely impede communication and you just can't understand what the person is trying to say, that is not the type of mistake a B2 learner should be making. You also have a good command of simple language structures and some complex grammatical forms, although they tend to use complex structures rigidly with some inaccuracy. So most language, grammatically speaking, that is produced by a B2 level learner tends to be simpler and more straightforward, all right? You might be able to use some more complex structures, maybe some passive voice sentences in your speech, maybe some conditional sentences, some reported speech sentences, but the likelihood is that you're going to, utter them wrong. Yeah, you're going to make some mistakes when trying to use them because, a B2 level learner is more about the simple, straightforward communication of ideas, all right? This idea of speaking with different structures and more advanced structures usually is more in C1, C2 levels, which we're going to talk about in a future episode, all right? Now, moving on to vocabulary. Listen, can understand and use the main technical terminology of their field when discussing their area of specialization with other specialists. Going back to the IT professional example, if you work in IT, you should be able to have meetings related to your field with other specialists without any issues if you are already at a B2 level of English, Okay? A B2 level learner also has a good range of vocabulary for matters connected to their field and most general topics. Can vary formulation to avoid frequent repetition, but lexical gaps can still cause hesitation. So when it comes to vocabulary, you might miss a few words here and there, and because of that, you might hesitate a little still in your communication, in your conversations with people. And this is a good point as well. Avoid frequent repetition. Ideally, your vocabulary range here should be much wider at this point, meaning that you are able to talk about a topic using synonymous words or words related to that topic. So for example, imagine you are writing an essay or talking about technology. What other words, aside from technology, can you use when talking about technology? You can use internet, AI, mobile phones or cell phones, computers, personal computers, laptops, social media even, algorithms, coding languages. You see, these are all related words to technology. So ideally, you should know a lot of them in order to avoid repetition. Also, a B2 level learner can produce appropriate collocations of many words or signs in most contexts fairly systematically, and can understand and use much of the specialist vocabulary of their field, but has problems with specialist terminology outside it. Again, when talking about your personal life or your professional life, the tendency is a B2 level learner will thrive as long as the topic at hand is familiar. If you are discussing something that is specific to your position in the company, to your work, your job, you will do fine. If you're talking about something about your personal life that you know a lot about, maybe you're a fan of soccer, maybe you love soccer, you will be fine talking about soccer, for example. You see, so the emphasis here for the B2 level learner is usually straightforwardness of language, some complex language is used, but not a lot, and familiarity. Familiarity. You are familiar with the topic at hand and also the standard variation of English. And finally, I want to talk here about pronunciation. What does it mean when it comes to your pronunciation to be at a B2 level? Listen, can generally use appropriate intonation, place stress correctly, and articulate individual sounds clearly. Accent tends to be influenced by the other languages they speak, but has little or no effect on intelligibility. You see? So at a B2 level, you should be able to use appropriate intonation, generally speaking, appropriate stress, appropriate articulation of the sounds. It's okay to have a distinguishable accent. It's fine, as long as your accent doesn't affect intelligibility. In other words, people should be able to understand you. So if you are a speaker of English who have a very thick accent or heavy accent, and that accent makes it hard for people to understand what you're saying, people struggle a lot to understand you, you are probably not a B2 level speaker yet. You might be at a B1 level or even a lower level, A2 maybe, depending on how hard it is to understand you because of your thick accent. So remember, let me just be clear here. Having an accent is not a problem. It's not an issue, okay? As long as you are intelligible, people can understand your message. So keep that in mind. So this is a brief overview of the B2 level. Now, let me give you some key words that I want you to take away from this episode. When you think of a B2 level user of English, think about these keywords. Listen, standard language, straightforward language, familiarity, intelligibility. In a nutshell, that's how I would define a B2 level speaker of English. Standard language, meaning that you are more comfortable with listening and producing the standard variations of English. Straightforward language. Yes, you might attempt to use some more complex structures from time to time or complex vocabulary, but most of the time you communicate in a straightforward, simple way. Familiarity. You tend to perform very well in English-speaking situations as long as the topic is familiar to you, both in the workplace and in your personal life. If you have to discuss something more abstract or something more unfamiliar, you might struggle considerably more. And finally, intelligibility. You communicate in a way that is clear, articulate, and it's easy for people to understand you. People don't have to strain so much to understand what you're saying. Even if you speak with an accent, which is totally fine, but you sound intelligible. If you have an intelligibility problem, then probably you're not a B2 level speaker yet. So now I want to talk about how to know you are at a B2 level. The best way to know is by taking a proper examination, a proper proficiency test. That's the best way to know if you are truly a B2 user of English. Here are some popular exams that you can consider taking down the road. The first one, obviously, is the Cambridge B2 First. The cool thing about the Cambridge B2 First exam is that they have a use of English component, meaning that they have a portion of the exam that directly tests your grammar knowledge and vocabulary knowledge. The other exams, they don't have that. They usually test only your macro skills, but I like how Cambridge also tests specifically some of your micro skills, the grammar and the vocabulary. This is really cool. It is perhaps the longest exam in the market. It takes you about 3.5 hours to complete, 3.5 hours. And the great thing about it also is that it does not expire. So once you have it for life. But we also have IELTS, which is another popular test for you to take. The great thing about IELTS is that there's no failing score. So it's a great test for diagnosis because you don't fail. And it's slightly shorter. It takes you about 2 hours and 45 minutes to complete. But still, it's quite a long test to take. And I actually saw that even Duolingo now has a proficiency test that you can take online. I was investigating it a little bit, and I actually found it interesting because it's a quick test. I believe it takes you about 1 hour to complete, so it's really quick. They deliver the results fast. I believe in 1 or 2 days, you get the results already. Apparently, it's far cheaper than these more traditional exams. And I even saw that they have an interesting listening exercise there to test how well you understand things, because you have to listen to a passage, a sentence, and then you have to type in verbatim exactly what you heard. And I really like that kind of exercise because, it's not just testing if you can understand the main idea of the conversation or specific information, but also it's testing your precision of listening. So I think that if you have never taken a proficiency test in your life, and you have absolutely no idea what your current level of English is, the Duolingo test might be a good candidate for you. Something quick that is cheap and that is easy for you to get. That should give you a pretty good baseline already. But ultimately, I really recommend you take some of the longer, more traditional ones. And when it comes to that, I have to say that to me, in my experience, the Cambridge exams are the best. IELTS is great for immigration purposes or study purposes, but Cambridge is great for language learning. If you just want a proficiency exam to truly test your language ability and to serve as a milestone for you, that you can also use in your CV, by the way, I think that Cambridge is the best one. It's the longest, it tests your vocabulary and grammar specifically, and it doesn't expire. And I also get the feeling that it is much harder. Cambridge is much harder than IELTS, let alone Duolingo, okay, or other exams out there. But aside from these, there are other proficiency tests out there available in the market. It's a matter of you, doing a little research and checking the websites of these institutions that apply these tests and, see if any of them appeal to you. But my top 3 for different reasons would be Cambridge B2 First. That's the ultimate. IELTS, just for diagnosis, but still with that challenge. And, if you're looking for a quick, fast solution, just to have an idea of what your level is, maybe the Duolingo test could help you with that, okay? As far as I researched. Now, let me end the episode with some final words. Listen. A B2 level English learner can confidently understand the main ideas of complex discussions and texts on both concrete and abstract topics, including technical information in their field. They can interact with native speakers with a good degree of fluency and spontaneity. making conversations feel natural without significant strain on either person. This means they can actively participate in discussions, explain their viewpoints on current issues with supporting arguments, and produce clear, detailed written texts on a wide variety of subjects. Essentially, a B2 user can navigate most everyday academic and professional situations in English independently and effectively. A B2 level English learner is someone who can use English confidently in many situations. Think of it as being comfortably independent with the language. Also, think of it as being confident in English. You're not perfect, and you might still miss some nuances or struggle with very specialized vocabulary, but you can definitely get by and communicate well in most situations. It's a solid level for working or studying in English. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I hope you enjoyed this comprehensive breakdown of the B2 level. I hope you found it informative and more enlightening now. And to conclude the episode, I want to play for you an audio message that I got from a viewer named Bogdan from Russia. So let's see what Bogdan has to say.
Hello, Thiago. Hello to you from southern Russia. My name is Bogdan, and I've been learning English for a while already, like a year and a half approximately. And I'm here right now just because of you. I was about to thank you for everything that you have done for me and for everyone that listening to your podcasts and videos as well. So I have to say to you that I was motivated just only by you in some moments, a lot of times, and you was along with me throughout my journey in learning English. So what can I say to everyone that is listening to it right now? Stay motivated, and because consistency is key. Thank you, Thiago, for your attention. Goodbye.
Thank you, Bogdan, for taking the time to send me this message. It was really nice, and it makes me flattered to know that what I'm doing here on YouTube, on the podcast, is affecting people from all over the world, no matter where they are. So, it's great. I'm glad to know that you feel motivated by me, by some of the content here that I put out. And thanks for being a follower. Thanks for watching. Thanks for, listening. And keep following the show. All right? If you want to do it just like Bogdan, you can send me an audio message by going to speakpipe.com/EnglishWithThiago, or you can also send me an email by writing to me at hello.teacherthiago@gmail.com. Leave me a comment down below letting me know what you thought about today's episode, and if now you have a better grasp or idea of what a B2 level means. And of course, check out my pronunciation course, The Sounds of English. This can be an invaluable tool in your journey. Link in the description, in the pinned comment below, and also in the show notes if you are on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Of course, subscribe to the channel here on YouTube, like the video, share this video with a friend who's also learning English, and stay tuned because I'll be talking to you very soon in the upcoming episode. Have a good rest of the week. Bye-bye.